Good evening, everyone. First and foremost, if audio and video both are fine, please let me know. Good. All right. So let's move on from where we left yesterday. Yesterday, we had started with our chapter on energy, and we had discussed about non-renewable energy sources first, and then we had moved on to the renewable energy sources, where we started discussing about solar energy. And this is where we are going to resume from. Now, in case of solar energy, we discussed the various different ways in which solar energy can be used, and we discussed about solar panels and uh, how solar panels can be used for electricity generation, and also about solar pumps. And then we started discussing about the national solar mission. Now, today again, we are going to resume from there, and the next topic for us is solar trees. So, here we are looking at a couple of innovative technology in case of solar energy that can help in making solar energy more efficient. Now, in this case, when it comes to solar tree, we are talking about a vertical structure of solar panels, something like this. So you have a kind of a structure that you have on a raised platform, and this basically is being called as solar tree. Now, in solar tree, first, why this solution? I mean, what kind of problem are we trying to solve? The main problem that we see with solar energy is the amount of space that it takes up. What we observe is, and if you go around, you'll see that whenever you have any solar panel, it will be just horizontally placed somewhere on the ground. So it occupies a huge amount of space, right? It occupies a huge amount of space, and that's why this is one of the ways in which we see that solar energy is getting solar energy occupies a lot of space, and that's why this is one of, you can say, the limitations of solar energy, where we do not see solar energy uh, being very efficient with regards to its land resource usage. And many a times we see that these are agricultural fields. Many of the times agricultural fields are used for solar energy installations. So that's why there are these issues, and that is one issue that is being tried to be solved with the help of solar trees, where we have a vertical structure. So the ground that might have been occupied now is free, right? Ground that would have been occupied is completely free, and that's why this ground can be used for various purposes. So many a times what also happens is that these are agricultural fields, and using agricultural field would be counterproductive, because those are the land resources that should be utilized in agriculture and not for solar energy installations. So this is where a solution like solar tree becomes very useful, because you can save some land in case of solar energy installations. So that's why it reduces land requirement, becomes very very crucial point in case of solar tree. Viable for both urban and rural areas. It can address the increasing demand for green energy, becomes environmentally friendly, and also can be helpful in increasing farm income, especially when it comes to these areas wherever the installations of these solar trees are being done. These are the areas where farmers would be paid an extra amount, because they are letting these areas, or letting their agricultural fields be used for solar energy installations. And that's why we see this as a very very important advantage. So that's why advantages of solar tree wise, you'll see that there are all these advantages that we have. So overall, these solar trees, that's why just understand that majorly we are trying to solve the problem of the limited amount of resources that we have, limited amount of land resources that we have. Similarly, there is another innovative solution, that is about floating solar power plants. Now, in case of floating solar power plants, as you can see, these are being installed on water bodies. Instead of installing on land, we are installing on water bodies. So that also is one of the ways in which we are trying to solve the problem of shortage of land. And that's why wherever you have stagnant sources of water, like ponds or lakes, etc., these are the sources that can be used for solar energy installations. And solar energy installations done in this way can also have added benefits. It's not only one problem that we are solving, that is of the shortage of land resources, but at the same time we are also trying to solve the problem of uh, we are also having some additional uh, advantages. For example, let's say when a large surface of the water resources are covered, it also means that it will be able to reduce the amount of evaporation that happens from these sources. So that's why when you look at the advantages, the first obviously is land resource wise, where we see that land use efficiency will be increased. So that's why they are ideal in densely populated areas or places where land is valuable. So that's why this is very, very important. And as we discussed, that land resources is one of the ways, one of the problems that we see with solar energy. Then it also can help in water conservation, as I told you that because a large amount of surface will be covered, that also means that it will be able to reduce the amount of evaporation that happens through these water resources, and that's why it will also help us in reduction of water evaporation. So that's why this also can be seen as one of the core benefits. Similarly, we see that because of the cooling effect of water, it will have a higher efficiency. The energy lost because of heat will be lower. So lower amount of energy will be lost through heat. So that also is one of the advantages. Similarly, algal growth inside the body of water will also reduce. And this is mainly because the surface is covered, and surface being covered also means that sunlight does not penetrate through, and that's why these algae which would need sunlight for their growth, that algal growth in these stagnant sources of water, that can also reduce. So that's why there are all these core benefits that we have out of a setup like floating solar power plants. Now, although we do see that there are these advantages, there are certain problems also that we need to understand. That when we say that reduced algal growth will happen because of photo lesser amount of photosynthesis, what we also need to realize is that uh, reduced algal growth also is not only one of the things that will happen. In general, the aquatic plants that you have, these aquatic plants will not have enough to grow. They would not get photosynthesis, they would not get sunlight for photosynthesis. So that means that the not only the unwanted growth but also the wanted growth will not happen. So that means that many of the aquatic plants might lose their lives because of lack of photosynthesis. That also means that other animals which are dependent on these plants, they would also suffer. And overall, eventually, what we can say is that it can lead to issues with the aquatic ecosystem. It can lead to degradation of the aquatic ecosystem. So that's why that is one disadvantage that we should be aware of in case of floating solar power plants. So that's why disadvantage. One major disadvantage that we have is lack of lack of sunlight leading to lack of sunlight leading to reduced photosynthesis, thus negatively impacting aquatic ecosystems. Negatively impacting aquatic ecosystems. So this is one disadvantage that we have here in case of floating solar power plants. So that's why we see that there are all these issues. There are these certain issues that we should be aware of. Now, overall, when it comes to the advantages of solar energy, there are all these advantages. Many of these advantages you can say are self-explanatory for you. Renewable energy, environmentally friendly, wide availability, versatile. Versatile because you can use it in various forms. We can use it as heat, we can use it as light. So that's why we are saying that this is versatile. Low noise, low maintenance, remote and portable parts option. Return on investment meaning that what we understand is that overall uh, the initial investment on solar energy will be huge because of the setup cost that we have in installations, etc. So initial setup cost can be big, But overall, when you look at a long term basis, you will find that the setup cost is uh, not something that matters a lot. So that's why this becomes very very crucial in this aspect, because it will be able to give us a better return in the long term. Overall, then again, it also leads to energy security increase. Energy security, if you remember, we discussed about this term energy security. Now this energy security mainly means that this is where domestic production is happening, and we are dependent on resources, we are dependent on energy that is being produced domestically. And domestic production also means that the same energy can be availed at much lower cost than if it was being bought from somewhere. For example, petroleum prices, or let's say petrol and diesel prices, will always be determined by also the international prices. So that's why international prices will have a direct impact on the purchasing power of every individual overall. And because we are buying, we are purchasing, it also means that we are paying extra, we are paying higher. And let's say the same production was happening in India, for example, then in that case the petroleum prices would have been much lower than what it is. So that's why energy security becomes very very crucial, because once you start using domestically produced energy, you are spending a lot less on energy, and that's why all your infrastructure will start becoming very cheap, and that will be very very good for the growth of Indian economy. So that's why energy security, increase of energy security, will be very very crucial. Then it becomes evolving technology, right? It becomes evolving technology, where we see that every day, every year, you will find that there is something new, some new innovative solution, some improvement in the efficiencies. So everywhere we'll see that there are all these changes that will keep on happening, all these advantages, positives that we'll keep seeing. So that's why this becomes very very crucial in the context of solar energy advantages. Similarly, there are some limitations also that we should understand. It is expensive initially, as we discussed, that initially it can be expensive, but this expense factor is not a big factor, because overall, or at in a long term situation, we see that it has a very good return. Then it is a daylight only solution. The production cannot happen 24 hours of time. Only when there you have a good sunlight, then only you can produce solar energy from there. Similarly, it is vulnerable to atmospheric conditions, cloudy weather, rainy season, or even air pollution, for that matter. Even air pollution can be a challenge. So that's why whenever you have these kind of conditions, where you have cloudy or rainy weather, also air pollution. So this all can be, this all can lead to lesser amount of solar energy being available. Now then, it one problem is that it also has a large footprint, meaning that it occupies more area. This is one of the issues that we discussed, occupies more area. And then there is something called as manufacturing pollution basically is the pollution while manufacturing of various critical components and parts which are related to solar energy. For example, let's say solar panel production. So solar panel production or manufacturing will use energy, and that is basically coal based energy. So indirectly there is some pollution being caused in the manufacturing of these parts and components. So manufacturing pollution during manufacturing of parts and components related to solar energy. And then there is something called as electronic waste. Now electronic waste basically is all the waste being generated because of the solar energy parts and various components. For example, solar panels which are working now, most of them, let's say uh, a lot of solar panels which have been manufactured in India, they have been manufactured in the last 5 6 years. And typically you can say that a solar panel can last up to 10 to 15 years. So in the next 5 years, a lot of these solar panels will start showing some problems, some issues, some challenges, and this is where a lot of electronic waste will be generated. So we need to be aware of that as well, that we need to have a very effective plan for the management of electronic waste which is related to solar energy, what we also call as e-waste. What we also call as e-waste. So that's why these are the things that we need to understand with regards to solar energy and all the limitations that we have with solar energy. Now, next up for us is wind energy. But before that, if you have any question related to solar energy, please let me know, and then we shall move ahead. How air pollution can make it vulnerable. See, air pollution means what? Many of the times, for example, if you look at the winter months in the North India, you'll see that there is smog kind of situation. Whenever smog or fog kind of situations happen, it means that the intensity of solar energy reaching the earth will be very, very less, and that means that you do not have enough solar energy available during summer when you have bright sunlight and sun is basically just coming down your throat all the time. This is where you have a lot of sunlight available, better intensity available, and that's why solar energy production is better. But in case of winter months, especially when air pollution starts to play a role, we see that intensity of sun is very, very weak, and that means that production of solar energy will be low. How farm income mainly because when, let's say, if in the agricultural fields, if the solar trees are being installed, then whoever is letting their fields being used for solar energy installation, they would be paid for a kind of compensation for letting the land being used, and that's why additional farm income. National Solar Mission. As we discussed National Solar Mission yesterday, that National Solar Mission is a mission to where we had a target that by the end of 2022 we should have a total installed capacity of 100 gigawatt with solar energy. That is National Solar Mission. Can you explain this electronic waste point? Electronic waste, basically, we are saying all the components or the electronic components which are made of, let's say, all the electrical and electronic devices that we have as a part of this entire setup. The glass, the semiconductor material, the plastics, etc. All these will become a part of electronic pollution or electronic waste. बुक में जो चैप्टर है एनर्जी इन इंडिया इसी टॉपिक से आई एम नॉट श्योर अबाउट द बुक आई हैव नॉट सीन द बुक but as I told yesterday also, forget about any book, whether it is a Baiju's book, whether it is an outside market book. Forget about any book. Please don't read any additional resource apart from whatever we are doing. Additionally, the only thing that you have to do additionally is current affairs. So please don't waste your time in going through any other resource. So it's my request to everyone. You will only be wasting time and doing nothing else. Schemes run by government to promote solar energy, we discussed all that yesterday. We discussed that there are almost 9-10 schemes right now which are being run, but only schemes which will be important for you, I would say, are the schemes which are being run currently. For example, the Suryoday scheme or the Suryagriha scheme. So these kind of schemes can be important. Don't go through the older schemes. Can we use lightning energy? See, theoretically, yes. And there have been a lot of scientific experiments where the scientists have tried to do that. But right now, it doesn't seem to be a very important, very easy task to use that energy because of the sudden burst of energy that we have there. Major challenges in using solar energy, we just discussed. Vikram, all these questions that you have given are the questions that we have already discussed in detail. Where the solar waste management takes place, as there is no management for proper disposal of it. No, so see, it's not about solar waste management, but rather what happens is that we are using uh, various different methods that we have. For example, we have an e-waste management rules of 2016, which was also amended later. So a lot of these plastic waste or semiconductor waste or metal or glass waste, they will be run through those systems. Similarly, there are plastic waste management rules. So that's why there are waste management rules with regards to all these various components. So that will take care of it individually, but there is no specific solar waste management rule. Can we run cars by installing solar panels? Very difficult, because the amount of energy that you will need constantly, it will be difficult unless you are using battery power. That you have solar panels which are charging the batteries, and those batteries are running the cars. Then it is theoretically possible. But if you are saying on, let's say, on a running basis, then right now, no. If water level decreases in ponds, what will happen to the solar panels? The solar panels, I mean, as long as the solar panels are effectively connected to a grid, they will work. After that, they wouldn't. How many marks questions can come from this? There is no guarantee. We cannot say. It can be 0, it can be 10, nobody knows. Not to read the book given also. I just said no book means no book, whether it is an inside book, outside book, book written by XYZ authors, book written by you, book written by me. Please do not read any book. Please just go through whatever we are discussing. And as I discussed yesterday also, only NCRTs, if at all you have to add, or if you really want to read a book, these should be class 6 to 8 NCRT science books. Otherwise, outside of this, no other book needs to be read. Please remember this. Why don't we use solar panels over canals? We can effectively. I mean, it is possible to use it. Just that floating solar panels cannot be installed, obviously, because it is running water. But over the canals, they can be placed, and it is a part of a discussion where we are actually trying to do that. So yes, it can be done. If you feel any topic will be important for this coming prelims, please mark it. I wish I knew which will be an important topic, but uh, I really don't believe in important topics. I believe in syllabus and completion of syllabus. So you have to complete your syllabus in going into the examination. Yes, there will be certain topics which will be more important perhaps than others, but in case of these areas, I would say the entire chapter of energy and space technology, and perhaps biotechnology. These three chapters are important, and it's very difficult to point out that where the question would come from. Everything that is in news is anyway being covered. That is where the static areas are being covered right now. So that's why very difficult to point out that this is an important area, or that is where a question cannot come from. Nowadays, some e-rickshaw are using solar panels to charge rickshaw rather than charging points. That's true. And that's where I said that battery power is where solar energy can be effective. And this is exactly what's happening. Hmm. Questions for practice. We'll keep taking the previous year questions, and questions for practice anyway are being given to you every day through the sessions that we take. There is a daily quiz that we do for you, and every day five current affairs questions are being picked, and we are discussing that every day in the sessions. So that also can become a big source for you for accumulation of all the questions. Plus, many of the current affairs questions we also have made it a part of the prelims test series. So that also becomes a very very important source for you to gather all the questions related to current affairs science. So there are mechanisms, there are various ways in which we are adhering to all these areas, and we are trying to get you all those questions that are required for your exam. Right, so let's move on. The next topic for us is wind energy. Now when we say wind energy, this is where we will try to make the use of the movement of air. How do we define wind? A very simple definition of wind, class 6th definition of wind. Yeah, movement of air, correct. Moving air is called as wind. Now, to be exact, what we say is that wind energy is basically a kind of kinetic energy associated with movement of large masses of air caused by differential heating of the atmosphere by the sun, irregularities on the surface of the earth, and rotation of the earth. Right? So that's why these are the three factors that lead to wind generation. Now, in case of wind generation, just understand this, that overall what we are looking at basically is that wind energy is a kind of kinetic energy, and to get energy out of this wind we need certain basic speed of wind. So what we see is that generally if the speed of the wind is above 15 kilometers per hour, if speed of wind is above 15 kilometers per hour, then in that case we say that the wind energy is useful for us. So now, to have this kind of energy, you need a very good flow of air, and that good flow of air is only possible when you have large spaces, large vacant spaces available. And that is where you'll see that the coastal states of India become very crucial, because coasts are the areas where you have large open areas. So that's why wind energy generation largely can happen from these coastal areas. So that's why when you look at the top five wind producing states in India, you'll see that you have Tamil Nadu as one state, you have Gujarat, you have Maharashtra, you have Karnataka, and then you have Rajasthan. So as you can see, four out of these five states are coastal states, and the fifth one is a desert state, and that's why there also you have large open areas available, and hence these are the states that become most viable for wind energy generation. Overall capacity of India as of last quarter is 44.5 gigawatt. We need to still see what the data is for the next quarter. So for, I mean, this is the data that was released in November, November 2023. So we have to see for the next quarter what exactly the data is. So the next quarter data, especially the March end data, will be very very crucial. So just have a look. I mean, in PIB in the month of April, you will come across new data as well. Now, in case of wind energy, what we see is that you have these windmills, and the rotation of these wind fans will happen. Rotation of these wind fans will rotation of these wind fans, they basically will convert the kinetic energy. What do we mean by kinetic? I'm using this term kinetic, and you might have come across the word kinetic energy. What is the meaning of the word kinetic? What is it related to? Yes, related to movement, related to motion, right? So energy that is generated because of motion, because of movement, is called as kinetic energy. So here what we see is that kinetic energy will be converted to electrical energy. Kinetic energy will be converted to electrical energy. So this is basically what we'll see in case of this wind energy, that kinetic energy, that is energy due to the motion of the air, will lead to the rotation of the fans, and these rotation of the fan will ultimately uh, will be converted to electrical energy. Now, in case of wind energy, there is something which has been in the news constantly, and this is offshore wind energy. Now, offshore wind means that this time, instead of having the installations on, let's say, the coasts or in the land areas, we are now going to the water areas, and we are going to do the installations on the continental shelves. Largely, the continental shelves will be used here. So, we will be making the use of continental shelves. Now, these continental shelves, they become very, very important because these are areas where the depth in the ocean is not that great. The depth in the seas is not that great. So, still, these are areas which are usable. Now, offshore wind has a very important advantage that you have very wide open areas, and that's where the flow of air will be much better than the flow of air that we have in on land. And on land, there is also a seasonality to the flow of wind, that in the summer months, in the monsoon months, the wind flow is better, but in the winter months you might see that the air masses, they settle down and the movement of air is not that great. That is also something that adds to the fog or the smog situation during winters. So that's why during winters we see that there are these kind of problems, but in the summer months the wind flow is better, or the monsoon months the wind flow is better. There is seasonality to the movement or of the wind or the direction of wind as well. So there are all these factors on land, whereas on the ocean these factors are much better, and that's why much more suitable for wind energy generation. So that is why we see that wind offshore wind power becomes very, very crucial in that sense. Now, when it comes to offshore wind power, this is where we see that offshore wind becomes very, very crucial, because here we are constructing. Offshore wind basically is where we are doing the construction on the body of water. Instead of doing the construction on land, we are doing the construction on body of water, and that's why here the flow is much better. And because of this flow, we'll see that we'll be able to produce much better amount of energy as compared to what we were doing on land. So that's why offshore wind becomes very crucial. Now, in case of offshore wind, what we have seen is that some of the European countries have done very well. All right, they have done very well, and these are the countries which have been fairly contributing to offshore wind power, and they have been using this offshore wind power for a while. Apart from that, we see that there are other countries growing. One example is China. China, the way they are adding to the resources, the aggression with which they are adding to the offshore wind resources, they very well will be way better than way better in terms of offshore wind energy installations compared to any of the European countries. And they're not only using their waters, but they're using all the controversial waters as well. For example, South China Sea, or as the Philippines would call as West Philippines Sea. So South China Sea also is one place where we have seen that China has done its started doing its installations, which, I mean, many of the other countries have been opposing. But China being China, it doesn't matter for them. And we know that for China, the entire world is China. Every border is a Chinese border. Every part of the world has to be a Chinese border. We see what happens with us also, that all the time they are at our borders and trying to enter and occupy our areas and all. Same is happening on their eastern borders as well, and that is where they have all these problems with the other countries, all the island nations also, for example, in these kind of areas. So that's why we see that China has been pushing a lot with when it comes to offshore wind, and we might see that China will take over any European country very soon. Now, in case of offshore wind, what we see in India is that we have been trying to set up offshore wind in India. Now, for example, last year we saw that there are areas that have been identified as potential offshore wind energy zones, especially two states, Tamil Nadu and Gujarat. These are the two states where India will be working a lot in trying to set up offshore wind energy power plants. Now, this is where we are also getting some help from some other countries as well. That countries, for example, the European countries, which have some expertise uh, with regards to offshore wind, they are the ones which are going to help India in setting up offshore wind. For example, uh, we are working with the government of Denmark. We are working with the government of Denmark, and the government of Denmark is helping India in setting up offshore wind. All right, it is helping India in setting up of offshore wind. So that's why we see that this is where this becomes very very crucial in terms of offshore wind in India. Now overall, just also understand where offshore wind production in India becomes very challenging. That first we see that it needs a lot of data collection, that we need to have a lot of data available with us, and then only we can proceed further uh, with offshore wind. Otherwise, in the current scenario, we need to have a lot of understanding of where to set up. Now you have to understand why. On the body of water, first and foremost, you have to identify those zones. Those zones should not be seismically active zones. Chances of earthquakes or tsunamis should be minimum, so that has to be taken into account. Plus these should not be zones which are going to be affected by cyclones, because cyclones can really hamper the infrastructure of offshore wind. So that's why it needs a lot of data collection, that we have to ensure that whatever we set up, we have set it up for the next 15-20 years, and we do not have to worry about it. So that's why the forecast will not have to be just a forecast of this year or the next year, but rather the forecast about the stability of the region for a lot longer duration of time. So that is a major challenge, right? That's a big challenge, and that is where we see that offshore wind becomes challenging. Similarly, uh, entire infrastructure cost itself is going to be very high. So that's why a lot of investment is also required in setting up these plants. Then in case of Europe, what we see is that years of incentives have been given to many of the companies that were involved in setting up of offshore wind. So incentives for setting up offshore wind plants to even the private companies. Now, for a private company also, it's not that easy. It's not that easy that they'll just start working with solar. I mean, they'll just start contributing to offshore wind. So for example, in solar energy, there are a lot of startups. There are a lot of startups which are related to some critical component or a part of solar energy infrastructure, because it's not a very capital intensive segment. But in case of offshore wind, it is going to be very capital intensive. So just for a small company, for a startup to work in offshore wind is not going to be easy, because there will be for sure years of losses before they maybe start gaining. So for them to withstand through all the losses throughout the years will be very very difficult. So that is where bigger companies perhaps can contribute. Bigger companies which have this kind of capital, which have the capital to just bear the losses for maybe next 5-7 years without having any issues. Only those companies perhaps can sustain. Otherwise, smaller companies cannot. And there, they would need support from the government. That government takes a share of that uh, loss, for example. So that's why these are things that the governments might have to do to encourage more of offshore wind energy. And then one more issue that we see is, practically what we see is that right now solar energy production is becoming cheaper. Still we have to add a lot of new infrastructure to solar energy as well. So it's not that solar energy is done. We discussed about the solar energy targets yesterday, that we have the next target as almost 300 gigawatt, whereas we are standing somewhere around 75 gigawatt. So there is still a big gap between the reality of today and the target that we have. So that's why solar energy is getting the first preference from the government. In case of wind energy also, onshore wind energy is getting more preference, because that is also something that is a tried and tested technology, and hence it's easier for us to keep setting it up even further. So that's why we see that given all these scenario, offshore wind takes a backseat, and we might not see a lot of investment in offshore energy. Although we do see that there is a pilot project now that the government of India has started working on off the coast of Gujarat. So similarly, there are a couple of projects being worked on in Tamil Nadu as well. So there are these areas that we are working on, and we have to see where it goes from here. So that's why there are these challenges that we need to understand. Then overall advantages, I would say very similar to what we discussed about solar energy as well. It is renewable and sustainable, environmentally friendly, reduces fossil fuel consumption. it is a free source of energy, has a small footprint. Now this is an advantage over solar energy, where we discussed about a large footprint that solar energy has. Then industrial and domestic installations can be done. Remote power solution is a possibility, meaning that in far off areas, remote areas, you can set it up. Maintenance requirements are low, increases energy security, and leads to more of job creation. Now job creation is also a point that we should mention in solar energy as well. Job creation, because we do see that in solar energy also there are a lot of things still to be done. There are so many schemes and policies that are being implemented, so that's why solar energy also will create a lot of jobs and is creating a lot of jobs. Even there is a scheme for that called as the Surya Mitra scheme. So Surya Mitra scheme is one scheme through which jobs are being generated by the government in the sector of solar energy. So that's why job creation is a point both for solar energy and wind energy. Now, some of the issues that we see with wind energy: first, wind fluctuations that you cannot guarantee, correct? You cannot guarantee that this is going to be the flow of air all throughout the year or this month or that month. So, you cannot predict that, okay, this much of energy generation for sure is going to happen, because it's completely unpredictable. For a day or a forecast for the next couple of days can be done. But for the entire month, doing the prediction of what the wind flow will be like is almost impossible. Then installation is expensive, same as the case with solar energy as well, that initial installation can be expensive. But again, here also the return on investment is good. Long term return is much better. Then also something related to noise pollution, where we know that there will be a constant movement of the wind fans, and that produces some noise that can be a challenge for the people living in nearby areas. But most importantly, there is this problem that we need to understand: the threat to wildlife and how it can have a negative impact on wildlife. If you look at the first picture, where you see that there are birds which are flying and there are windmill blades through which the birds are flying. Now, there are chances that birds will collide with. It's not an unknown phenomenon. It is something that has happened in the past, and it can very well happen in anywhere wherever you have a wind energy installation. Now, in these kind of areas, one major problem that we also see is that there have been even cases of electrocution of birds. For example, this bird. Do you know the name of this bird? Which bird is it? Yes, the Great Indian Bustard. This is the Great Indian Bustard. Now, this Great Indian Bustard, what you need to know about Great Indian Bustard is that Great Indian Bustard is a critically endangered species. All right, critically endangered species. And initially, the Great Indian Bustard was found outside India as well. For example, it was also found in parts of Pakistan and even in Nepal. But now it is extinct. It is extinct from Pakistan, it is extinct from Nepal, and it is only found in India as of today. So now, in this particular scenario, there was an incident where we saw that one of the Great Indian Bustards, they lost their life because of electrocution. And electrocution happened from a wind energy power plant, wind energy farm. So that is where we need to understand that although wind energy is very good, but still there are these issues that we need to understand. Now, why these issues are important? Great Indian Bustard, do you know the total population of Great Indian Bustards available in India right now? How many of them are left? Yeah, almost 200, 150 to 200. So just 200 birds left in the world, and that too in India, and that too only in three states: in Rajasthan, Gujarat, and couple of districts of Maharashtra. That's it. They're not found anywhere else in India also, and they are not found outside India anyway. So in case of this, when an electrocution happens with a critically endangered bird, we need to understand this problem, that where the problem lies, that when the installations are being done or wherever you are setting up a wind energy farm, we need to understand the flora and fauna of that area. We need to know the ecosystem of that area, and we should not be hampering something which is critically endangered, and we'll have to take steps to ensure that these are being taken care of. Now, this is where something called as environmental impact assessment becomes crucial. Environmental impact assessment is a kind of assessment that is done for any infrastructure project, wherever large infrastructure project is being set up in any part of the country. So let's say a hydroelectricity power plant. Before the setting it up, a good analysis of that area will be done, so that we understand environmentally whether or not it is viable to have a plant or have a plant uh, in this area. And sometimes we do find that these are very critical areas, so the plants should not be set up. Now what happens is that when it comes to energy like wind energy, solar energy, etc., they are exempted. Any renewable or any clean source of energy, clean energy sources are exempted. Now this is big. All right, this is big uh, because the assumption here is that, look, wind energy or solar energy are going to be advantageous, so why to put that risk, why to put them under this kind of scanner? So that's why they are exempted. But this exemption can also lead to these kind of issues. And once, let's say, a bird dies, or let's say a couple of birds die, the birds might have to even shift their habitat. For example, the birds need to fly to even collect their food. So if they know that there is a kind of a danger in them flying through a particular region, they might not be able to do that, and they'll then look to move towards a new habitat. And if, let's say, one critical species moves out of a habitat, it can have a negative impact on all the other species as well. There are other species, other plants, other animals which might have been dependent on the presence of this bird. That means that the entire ecosystem will be disturbed because of the absence of a bird. So that's why wildlife threat is one of the challenges with wind energy that we need to understand very well. And that's why accordingly, uh, we have to take decisions to ensure that nothing goes wrong in these kind of scenarios. The next thing is geothermal energy. But before we go to geothermal energy, if you have any doubts with regards to wind energy, please let me know. What is the mechanism of wind energy production? It's just that airflow happens, leads to the movement of the wind blades, and once the blades move, they produce kinetic energy. That kinetic energy goes to the transformer that improves the voltage, increases the voltage for, so that long uh, long distance transmission of this energy can happen, and hence uh, energy will be, or electricity will be generated. So once discuss clean energy source. Clean energy source is anything that does not pollute. Solar energy, wind energy, geothermal energy, or even biofuels, or even nuclear energy for that matter. All these can be called as clean energy sources. How to rotate the pans of the? We will not rotate. It will rotate because of air movement. Offshore and onshore wind energy projects difference is only that onshore means that you are doing the installations on land, whether in the coastal areas or maybe inland areas as well. Offshore means that you are doing it on water. So that's the only difference. ऐसे भी क्वेश्चंस आते हैं क्या, जो इमेज दिखाकर पूछते हैं कि नहीं नहीं, within these kind of questions are not asked. I just asked you whether, just to see whether how many people know about this, nothing else. But these questions don't come in the paper. Is it vapor or smoke? It's actually water vapor. A lot of it is water vapor. We'll discuss this. One of the disadvantages of solar energy could be that because of reduction of algae, petroleum content could also decrease. Not really, because algae has nothing to do with petroleum. Petroleum production from algae happened millions of years back, doesn't happen anymore. Can you please increase the size of your video? I'm not sure whether that can be done. It is a full screen video only, if I believe. Will we discuss C wave energy in the content? Not really, because there is no real current affairs or anything with regards to what India has been doing. So, not a lot is being done in that, in ocean energy or wind, sorry, wave energy, etc. Notes, PPT, or books? No, no book. For everyone, please remember, no book. In my classes, I don't need you to read any book. If it was any other class, maybe that's different story. But in my class, I don't need anyone to read any book apart from NCRTs that I told you about. So please forget that a book exists in science and technology. And this is something that I've been requesting since yesterday. In this subject, the way UPSC asks you questions, no book will ever help you in this subject. So please do not ask me any question about any book. All right. So moving on, the next source of energy is geothermal energy. Now, in case of geothermal energy, geothermal is the term being used, right? Geothermal. Now, what is the meaning of the term geo and what is the meaning of the term thermal? Thermal is something that we have already seen, that thermal means heat, something associated with heat. And what is geo related with? The earth, correct? So that's why the heat that you are getting from inside the earth, when you use that energy, it is called as geothermal energy. All right, that is what geothermal energy is. That this is the heat energy from inside the earth that we are using in one way or the other. So that is called as geothermal energy. So overall, geothermal energy is the energy from inside the earth, the energy that we get from inside the earth. Because as you go beneath the earth, you know that the temperature of the earth keeps on increasing. That it starts with, when you start with the crust, you go to the mantle and then the core. You see that the temperature increases as the depth increases. So here you have a lot of heat reservoir, and sometimes through one mechanism or the other, the heat through these reservoirs might come to the surface. So once it comes to the surface, this is where we call it as geothermal energy. So there are two major sources. One, heat from when the planet was formed and accreted, so that is called as geothermal. And then it could be also because of decay of radioactive elements. Decay of radioactive elements also produce heat. They also produce heat, and this heat can be used. So we'll discuss about radioactive elements, etc., when we go to nuclear technology. But for now, just know this, that we are talking about geothermal energy, that is energy from inside the earth. So where we can use geysers or boiling mud pots or volcanoes or hot springs, these kind of reservoirs can be used, where all the heat from inside the earth, through the mechanism of, let's say, through the cracks that you have in the plates, etc., this heat can come to the surface, and that heat can be trapped and used for energy generation. Now, in this particular scenario, when it comes to geothermal energy, we see that geothermal energy can be produced in various different ways. There are three types of plants through which geothermal energy can be produced. Now, why we are discussing about the plants also? Because these plants also have been in the news. Last year, in the energy edition in Yojana also, they had mentioned about these plants, the Yojana magazine, and the government of India also has been discussing it. And then there was a report on these plants which had come a couple of years back, and that report also is very, very important. So three types of plants that we have here are dry steam power plants, flash steam plants, and binary cycle plants. Now, in terms of these three plants, just understand how they work. First is dry steam power plants. Now, in case of dry steam power plant, what happens is that you have the reservoir here. All right, you have the reservoir here, meaning this is where you're getting all the heat energy from. And this heat energy that you're getting, this heat energy will be carried. All right, this heat energy will be carried, and it directly goes to the turbine. So this heat energy in the form of the steam, in the form of the steam, this steam basically goes to a turbine, and it leads to the rotation of the turbine. And as this turbine rotates, it goes to the transformer and goes to the power plants. So in this manner, we would be producing energy with the help of steam, the steam that we are getting from these resources, these reservoirs. So like a hot spring, for example. So through this hot spring, the heat that is getting generated, that heat is being taken to the uh, turbine. All right, and then after that, this will go through a condenser and then goes back to the reservoir. So in this manner, this cycle continues. This cycle continues where the heat basically will keep on getting back to the dry steam power plant. So in this manner, the dry steam power plant would work, where the heat is directly taken to the turbine. Now, so we pipe the hot steam from the underground reservoirs directly into the turbines from geothermal reservoirs. Now, another power plant that we use is called as flash steam power plant. Now, in case of flash steam power plant, what we basically see is that in case of flash steam power plant, there is one basic difference that we use, and that is the use of the flash tank. The use of the flash tank. All right, we make the use of flash tank. Now, what is a flash tank? Flash tank basically is a tank where you have normal pressure and normal temperature. Now, what we do here in case of flash steam power plant is that the reservoir that you have right here, the reservoir that we have right here, this reservoir basically is uh, kept at high pressure. Now, when you keep high pressure, water does not evaporate at 100 degrees Celsius or does not change into steam at 100 degrees Celsius. Normally, what happens? Let's say you have a bowl of water, you boil that water, and as you boil water, what happens? Water will boil at 100 degrees Celsius and completely convert into its gaseous state at 100 degrees Celsius. But if you maintain high pressure, then water will not convert into steam at 100 degrees Celsius. Water will still remain water even at 110, 120, 130, 140 degrees Celsius. It can still remain in its water or its liquid form. So that's why when you have high pressure, water will remain in its liquid form even at higher temperature. And this is exactly what we do here. We maintain high pressure so that liquid water is carried to the flash tank. Now, this flash tank is at normal pressure. So what happens is that you all of a sudden you move from high pressure to low pressure. And as you move from high pressure to low pressure, we see that suddenly water changes into steam. So that is called as flashing. This is called as flashing, that water flashes into steam. So this water basically that is at high pressure is taken to the reservoir, sorry, is taken to the flash tank, and this is where water changes into steam. And as water changes to steam, this is where the steam basically will go to the turbine and again leads to the rotation of the turbine, and the entire process will be similar. And this is again where we take the water back to the reservoir. So in this manner we see that this is where we see that flash tank is used. Now why do we use flash tank? To improve upon the efficiency. When you are carrying liquid water until the flash tank, you are able to conserve more energy, and that's why energy efficiency of this entire system is better than the dry steam power plant. So that's why this flash steam power plant, it performs much better than the dry steam power plant. All right, it performs much better than the dry steam power plants. So efficiency wise this is better, but apart, even compared to the flash, so what we see is that there is a flash tank, and we see that the flash tank is at much lower temperature and pressure, much lower temperature and pressure, causing the fluid to quickly flash into steam, basically convert into steam. And then we have the binary cycle plants. Now in case of binary cycle plants, what we see is, binary means what? Two. So there are two cycles which are running. So that's why binary cycle plants, because there are two cycles which are running here. Now which are these two cycles? One cycle, as you can see, this is one cycle that you have here. This is one cycle running, and there is another cycle running like this, right? So there are two cycles which are running parallelly, and that's why it is called as a binary cycle plant. Now what do we do in binary cycle plant? There are two cycles. One cycle is of the same water. So again you have the same reservoir here. You have the reservoir here, and this reservoir this reservoir is connected to water or steam. So now what happens is that this is where steam goes to this, through this cycle like this. All right. So steam goes through this cycle, something like this. So now what happens is that there is only one cycle like this, that is of steam. But then there is another cycle of an organic liquid. All right. There will be an organic liquid. So organic liquid like isobutene, pentane, pentene, etc. All these are used. So there is a second liquid. And why organic liquid? Because organic liquid evaporates at much lower temperature. They would have temperature, I mean, they would boil and they would convert into steam at much lower temperature, like 50 degrees Celsius or 60 degrees Celsius, and so on. So generating energy from there or getting better efficiency is easier through this particular segment. So what happens is that this organic liquid, the second organic liquid, is converted to this cycle, and this is where we see that this steam will go to the turbine, or the organic liquid steam will go to the turbine, and that will lead to the rotation of the turbine. So here what we see is that the overall efficiency is even better. But not only that, the amount of uh, when we talk about all the clean sources of energy or all the renewable sources of energy, out of all the renewable energy sources, binary cycle plant has been seen as the cleanest of all the resources, cleanest of all the different types of energy sources, not only among geothermal energy, even compared to wind energy, even compared to solar energy, even compared to biofuels. Binary cycle plants have been seen as the cleanest source of energy. Right? They are the cleanest source of energy. And this was a report that was published by IPCC. So this was in the IPCC report. Do you know what is IPCC? What does IPCC do? Any idea what is IPCC? You will read about this in Environment and Ecology if you have not done that already. IPCC basically stands for Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. What they do is that they publish reports on various aspects of climate change. Various reports based on scientific evidence and scientific studies that have been carried on by various, let's say, institutions, organizations, etc. Based on that, they collect all that information and they keep on publishing reports. So one of the reports that they had published on renewable energy sources, this is where they had published that binary cycle plants are the cleanest source of energy. And that's where this becomes very, very crucial to understand, because they are uh, because they have surfaced in these kind of reports. They have very good efficiency and they are very clean. So that's why binary cycle plants especially become important. Now when you look at geothermal energy in India, in case of geothermal energy in India, this was also in news that ONGC is going to map India's 10 gigawatt geothermal energy potential. Now we have figured out various areas in India, that these are the areas where we have potential for geothermal energy. For example, these areas, and especially the Himalayan belt, this entire area, this is the area where the tectonic lines also run. So wherever you have the tectonic lines, wherever you have the fracture lines, these are the areas which are always the best source of geothermal energy in the entire world. In the entire world, you will see that these are the areas where you see very good energy sources. So same is the case with India as well, that you can see that the areas of Ladakh, Jammu and Kashmir, Himachal Pradesh, Uttarakhand, Sikkim, Arunachal Pradesh. These are all the areas which are good areas with geothermal energy. And then apart from that, there are other areas also which have been marked in India, that these are the areas which have good potential with geothermal energy. And overall energy estimation for India is that India has a total potential of 10 gigawatt with regards to geothermal energy. So, geothermal energy potential in India is estimated to be around 10 gigawatt, and Geological Survey of India has identified 340 geothermal hot springs in the country, and these are the areas from where we would be able to get energy. Similarly, we see that there are smaller scale, we have already started making the use of geothermal energy. For example, in the Puga Valley, there is an MOU that has been signed between ONGC and Ladakh. And in the Puga Valley in Ladakh, ONGC is setting up a geothermal energy power plant, which will take care of all the local energy requirements. Because these are areas where you hardly have any electricity sources. So that's why these are the areas which are being electrified, or at least energy sources are being provided with the help of geothermal energy. Similarly, we see that there was another news. This was about Geothermal Core of Texas that has signed a letter of intent to invest rupees 820 crores in Uttar Pradesh. Similarly, there is another company that is an Iceland-based company, Reykjavik Global, and this Reykjavik Global also is a private company coming to India to look into India's geothermal potential and set up some of the power plants, especially in Chhattisgarh, in Andhra Pradesh, etc. So that's why we see that this is the potential that we see overall with regards to geothermal energy production in the country. Now, overall, when you look at the advantages here, the points are pretty straightforward: renewable and sustainable, environmentally friendly, constant supply. Now, this is important because both in terms of solar energy and wind energy, we discussed that we do not have a constant supply of energy through these resources. But that's not the case with regards to geothermal energy, because geothermal energy is where you can actually get energy 24 hours a day, and you don't have to be worried about that. So that's why this is where it becomes very, very important for us to also understand this, that this is where it has some advantage over solar and wind energy. Then this also has a small footprint, and footprint is not even a big challenge altogether, because these are also areas which are not suitable for agriculture anyway. So it's not that agricultural land is being used. These are also areas where you have sulfur content being very high, and then the heat energy is higher. So not very suitable for growth of plants or growth of agriculture. So that's why it is nothing to be worried about altogether. Then it is cost effective. Again, in a long term, maintenance requirements are low, low noise, reduces fossil fuel dependency, and increases energy security. Job creation, huge potential. So we know about all these things, and we understand that there are all these things that we need to see with regards to or the advantages that we have with geothermal energy. Then the limitations. So limitations wise, first limitation is geographical limitation. We know that not every area is suitable, and you cannot pick and choose. Only the areas which naturally have hot springs, etc., they only are the areas where you can set up set up these kind of geothermal energy power plants. So that's why there are these limitations. Then large investment requirements. So we know that setting up cannot be that easy. We have to identify whether the areas can sustain for long or not. Can we keep getting energy all the time or not? So that's why we see that there are all these things. Then environmental impact, right? So there are chances that hydrogen sulfide gas, for example, so hydrogen sulfide gas can be emitted from these areas. I'm not saying that they are emitted, but there is a chance. Then there are sustainability concerns, that whether or not the areas that we are using, are they giving us enough energy that you can sustain for longer durations? So that also is questioned sometime. And then there are chances of seismic instability, because as I told you that many of these areas are along the tectonic lines. So that's why these are areas which are unstable areas, prone to earthquakes. And when you start getting energy and set up plants here, this is where it can add to the instability of the areas, and it may so happen that it might lead to situations of earthquakes, etc. And it has happened in the past. There has been a case in Switzerland, there has been a case in the US, where when they led where was a very small scale earthquake. I think on Richter scale it was only 3.7, but when they looked into the epicenter, they found that the epicenter actually was a geothermal energy power plant. So that's why there are these challenges, and it's not something which is only a potential, but something that has happened in the past already. So that's why these are some of the limitations with geothermal energy. Any questions? Any questions from whatever we have discussed? Why only hydrogen sulfide gas? This is mainly because of sulfur presence, which is mixed with the moisture, because you also have steam. So steam meaning H2O. So that H2O combining with sulfur can lead to hydrogen sulfide gas production. So that's why. Every question asks advantage or disadvantage. Not necessarily. You should just know that there are these two sides, just in case somebody asks you about what are the challenges or what are the benefits, etc. Then you can use these points. Please explain sustainability concern point. So sustainability concern, what we are saying is that there are some sources, not every hot spring or not every geyser, etc., will have enough energy production. They will not be big sources, and that's when not enough heat might be coming out of these places. So if the amount of heat is not enough, then you cannot generate energy from there, because you might be wasting more energy than the amount of energy that you're generating. So it will not be sustainable for us to use these areas or use these kind of resources. How we know which gases are harmful? We know because if let's say it has an impact on the human body, if it has a negative impact on the human body, then and these are all experimentally conducted. It's not that we know since eternity. We just know that there are things that can lead to degradation of cells and tissues in the human body or even for other organisms, and that's why they would be deemed as harmful. Is 10 gigawatt formed per year? It is basically the total potential. So yes, you can say that in a manner that once we are able to tap that total potential, we then can say that 10 gigawatt can come from only geothermal energy. Why binary cycle plants are cleanest than hot steam plants also? So basic idea here is that there is first and foremost, in the entire cycle that we have, the cycle itself is made in a manner that emissions are very low. All right, efficiency is also high, so you do not have to use a lot of external energy, so that also increases its overall value. And the pollution levels are almost, you can say, negligible. So that's why. Please explain again binary cycle plant. So in case of binary cycle plant, just let me go back. Hmm. In case of binary cycle plants, we are saying that there are two cycles running. One cycle is of steam. So steam coming from the reservoir has its own cycle. Now this steam comes in contact with a second liquid, that is an organic liquid with much lower boiling point. So it comes in contact with this organic liquid, and then this organic liquid would come change into its gaseous form and go to the turbine. So in this manner, there are these two cycles being run parallelly. Mapping related to this in India can be asked? No, I don't think so. In not in science, mapping questions only if they have to come, they would come in geography, not in science. But you should know the areas just in case. Let's say a question comes on geothermal potential of India, then using the map to just mark those areas in writing those answers can be a very good idea. Not understood. What not understood? You'll have to be very specific on this. Hmm. Even for generating, we need to spend on motor pumps. That's not beneficial. No, some amount of energy, obviously, amount of energy will always be required. But overall, it depends on how much energy are you using to generate how much energy. Let's say you're using just 1 gigawatt of energy to produce 10 gigawatts of energy, then that's great. But if you're using 5 gigawatt of energy to generate 6 gigawatt of energy, then that's not good. So that's why you have to identify things based on that. Out of syllabus, but what happened to that zombie virus you talked in webinar? So zombie virus, it's, I mean, it is a work in progress that the scientists have found it. They are trying to experiment on it. They are trying to understand how this survived for so long, what their structure is like, and can they be related to some kind of pathogenesis, or can they cause some kind of disease in humans, etc. So that's a research going on altogether on those viruses. आंसर राइटिंग एक साल हो गया कैसे? So answer writing, we'll discuss answer writing at the end of the chapter. Let's just focus on the chapter. Until then, I'll discuss about answers. I still did not understand how binary cycle plants work. So basically, see, there is this cycle in the general plants like dry steam or flash steam power plants. There was this cycle that was going to the turbine, but now we are saying that this will not go to the turbine and it will have only its one cycle related to the reservoir, where the steam is just having its own cycle. Now there is this, as you can see, that there is this exchanger where you have the organic liquid. All right, so organic liquid is kept here. like pentane could be kept, or isopentane, or isobutene, etc. They can all be kept. So you have the liquid form of organic liquid here. Now this liquid will have a very low boiling point, like 50 degrees Celsius. Now the steam comes in contact with it. Because steam is coming in contact, steam is at 100 degrees Celsius, of course, correct? So because it is at 100 degrees Celsius, comes in contact with something that can boil at 50 degrees Celsius. So that's why this organic liquid now converts into its vapor form. And as it converts into its vapor form, it is carried to the turbine. All right, it is carried to the turbine, and in this manner it will go to the turbine and lead to the generation of energy from there on. The output ratio play a very crucial role. Yes, exactly correct. That the output ratio here plays a very important role. What is a geyser? Geyser basically is a natural source of hot water. And this is where water at high energy can actually be released from the earth. So these are called as geysers. So you'll see that it would be like a fountain of hot water, fountain of steam that is generated out of the earth. Out of all these, binary is the most efficient. Yes, exactly it is. How hot water is pumped from underground, at which level found these hot at what level do we find these hot streams? So basically, it comes to the surface. We do not go in depth. It comes to the surface. All the heat comes to the surface itself, and we collect the energy from there on. In binary cycle plants, is there no emission at all? No. Saying that will be wrong. There are emissions, but emissions are very low. Emissions are lowest compared to any other source. List out all the places of geothermal energy in India. There are 340 places. You don't need that. You just understand which areas, what are the places where we have it. Apart from that, also, there are a lot of smaller places as well. You have in Uttar Pradesh, in Bihar, Jharkhand, in Madhya Pradesh, there are a lot of places. You can't remember those names, and don't even try to remember those names. How do the IPCC get to know how clean energy it is? Because they are doing the end-to-end analysis of how much carbon, what is their carbon footprint, how much of emissions are happening, and that's the basis. That's it. So next up is bioenergy. Let's take a small break, and on the other hand, let's start with bioenergy altogether. So the time is 6:26. So let's be back by 6:40. Let's be back by 6:40 and continue from here on. Welcome back, everyone. The next source of energy that we have is bioenergy. Now, in case of bioenergy, when we say that it is bioenergy, the meaning is that it must be energy coming from biological sources, and that's why bioenergy, right? So, bioenergy is energy of biological origin, derived from biomass such as fuel wood, livestock manure, municipal waste, and energy crops. Now, wherever we are making the use of any biological resource, plants and animals, largely plants and animals. So if we are getting energy from plants and animals, then in that case we'll say that it is bioenergy. And one of the most important sources of bioenergy are energy crops. Energy crops. Now, energy crops, specifically, these are crops which have good sources of carbohydrates. All right, these are good carbohydrate sources, and that's why they are being called as energy crops, because that is the role of carbohydrates as a nutrient in our body, that they would provide us energy that is required for us to function. So that's why all these plants which are good sources of carbohydrates, they are called as energy crops. And you'll see that many of the plants that we are using for bioenergy production, they actually are energy crops. Now in this particular scenario, when it comes to energy crops, oh sorry, when it comes to bioenergy, biomass is something that becomes very, very crucial. Now, in case of biomass, just understand this, it is nothing but the biological material that is derived from living or recently living organisms. All right, recently living organisms. And in the context of energy, they will become the source. They will become the source from where we will try to derive this energy, biomass. Similarly, another term that we have here is feedstock. Feedstock is nothing but the raw material. Feedstock is nothing but the raw material, and this basically is the raw material that we are using for bioenergy production. So any kind of biomass that becomes useful, because see, biomass can be any biological material, but you cannot say that all biological materials can generate bioenergy. The ones that will produce bioenergy, the kinds of biomass that will produce bioenergy, they will be called as feedstock, because they become the raw material for energy generation. Now, here we are basically talking about the biofuels, just like how we discussed about fossil fuels, the fuels that are coal and petroleum based. Similarly, we have biofuels, the fuel that is biological in its origin. So again, just to let me just recap all these terms, because there are so many terms all of a sudden for you. We are saying that there is something called as bioenergy, then we have biomass, then we have energy crops, then we discuss the term feedstock, and now we have this term biofuel. All right, so these are the uh, terms that we came across. Bioenergy means what? That these are energy from biological sources, right? So any energy that you're getting from biological sources, you will say that it is bioenergy. So bioenergy is energy from biological sources. What kind of biological sources? Biomass. So biomass is the biological material that you derive from organisms, whether plants or animals or even microorganisms. So any biological mass or biological material that you derive from organisms will be called as biomass. So that's why bioenergy, biomass. Then we have energy crops, specific types of crops that are useful in production of bioenergy, mainly carbohydrate based crops. So they are called as energy crops. Feedstock, the kind of biomass that can become raw material, will be called as feedstock. Let me just also write it here. So raw material. So you can say in a manner, biomass that can become, or that can be used as raw material for bioenergy production. Right, so that will be called as feedstock. So these are the terms that we came across, and now we have biofuel. So biofuel basically is the fuel that is biological in its origin, but also understand how is it different from fossil fuel. Because in case of fossil fuel also we said the same thing, that you have zooplanktons and algae from where you got petroleum, and you have all the vegetation from where you got coal. So even they are biological in their origin. So if I ask you, can you tell me what is the most important difference between biofuels and fossil fuels? What is a very very important differentiating factor between biofuels and fossil fuels? Can you tell me that? Yes, Vikram, you are correct. Khushi, you are correct. Jatin, Gunjan, you also have given correct answer, but not exactly the answer that I was looking for. Madhu, you are correct. Pavitra, in a manner, you are correct. Sakshi, you are correct. So basically, just understand the most important differentiating factor between the two is the time scale, because these are also hydrocarbon based. They were also hydrocarbon based. They are also biological in origin. They were also biological in origin. So there are these similarities, but the major differentiating factor is time. In case of fossil fuels, we have discussed that they take 250 to 300 million years, or up to 350 360 million years for their formation. And in case of biofuels, couple of weeks, maybe a month, maybe a couple of months, that's it. So in case of biofuels, the time required for biofuel production is only weeks or months of time, whereas in case of fossil fuels, millions of years of time. That's the most important differentiating factor between biofuel and fossil fuel. So that's why when we define biofuel, we define it like this: any hydrocarbon fuel that is produced from organic matter in a short period of time, is considered as biofuel. So that's why we have bioethanol, biodiesel, biogas, etc. They are examples of biofuels because they come from organic matter and they are produced in a short span of time, in a short period of time. So that is how this is where the things are different. So now, when it comes to biofuels, before we go on to the all these different types of biofuels, first thing to understand in case of biofuels are is how do we classify biofuels on the basis of various generations. What is first generation, second generation, third generation, and fourth generation biofuels? Now, in case of first generation biofuels basically are based on food crops, meaning that you are deriving energy largely from agricultural crops, the crops from where you also get your food. So wherever we are getting our food from, that's the same source where we are also getting biofuel from. So that is first generation. Now, one factor about first generation is that it is relatively more polluting, relatively more polluting than third or fourth generations. All right, relatively more polluting than the third and the fourth generations. Then in case of second generation, we are either trying to use non-edible crops or non-edible plants, or we are making the use of wastes, either agricultural wastes or municipal waste. Agricultural waste or municipal waste. So that's why non-edible plants or wastes are being used largely. Now they are also called as advanced biofuels. They are also called as advanced biofuels. And the reason why they are being called as advanced biofuel is largely because the method of production is not that easy. Because if, let's say, if it was easy to get energy from these sources, then our world will be different, would have been different, because then we are not dependent on food crops. We don't have to worry about using the same food crops for fuel production. But unfortunately, in case of second generation, getting it from non-edible crops, or getting it from agricultural waste, or maybe even getting it from municipal organic waste, is not that easy. And that's why they are also called as advanced biofuel, and that is why they are the second generation. So now here also pollution levels are higher. So again the same point, relatively more polluting than third and the fourth generations. All right. Now in this particular scenario, first and second generation, largely you will see that the kinds of biofuels that we are using today in India, or even across the world, you would say, you can see that largely what we are using is either first generation or second generation. We still aren't using third generation or fourth generation at all. So that is one thing that you need to understand. Now overall, when it comes to the third generation of biofuel, this is where we see that primarily this is based on algae. Primarily this is algae based. Now because it is algae based, we see that there are several advantages that algae bring into this equation. Now obviously they are less polluting, so this becomes a factor. They are less polluting. They are less polluting than the first and the second generation. Now when it comes to algae basically brings in a lot of advantages with it. Understand what advantages? First, it needs less time. It needs less, it requires less time for processing, so that is one thing. Then apart from that, so basically it grows very fast. So let me write it this way, makes it easier for you to revise later. It grows faster. So a crop, for example, can take up to a month's time or maybe a couple of months time to grow. From there on, then the processing begins, and ultimately maybe by the third month you have the fuel ready. Whereas in case of algae, the growth is very fast, and you would have the algae available within a couple of weeks time. So in a couple of weeks you would have the algae available, and then you can derive energy from there on. So that's why getting energy is much faster, and hence the processing time is much lesser as compared to the first or the second generations. So it grows faster, that is one. Then it has higher efficiency. It has higher efficiency in case of energy production. All right. Higher efficiency in energy production. All right. Higher efficiency in energy production, where we see that when it comes to first or the second generations, the energy efficiency would be somewhere around 30, 40, 30, 35%, etc. Whereas in case of algae based biofuel, it can go up to 50% or even beyond 50%. So that's why you get more energy, meaning that if you have, let's say, 100 grams of rice or 100 grams of potato, for example, versus 100 grams of algae, then 100 grams of algae will give you more energy as compared to 100 grams of rice. So that's the meaning of having higher efficiency. So it grows faster, it has higher efficiency, and also one more very, very important factor, less competition, less competition for resources, less competition for resources, mainly because of the fact that when we are talking about land based crops, then you have to grow those crops in agricultural fields only, right? In the agricultural fields you have to grow them. So either you grow them in the agricultural fields, or you have to find new spaces, but there are no new spaces. So agricultural fields have to be used, and that also means a competition for resources, because the same field would have been used for crop growth or food crop growth. Now you want to use that piece of land for biofuel production. So that's why competition for resources, for land, for water, for fertilization, fertilizers, etc. So that's where competition, whereas algae grow underwater. All right, so less competition for resources because they grow underwater, because they grow underwater. So that's why you have all these advantages with algae based biofuel, that they would be able to solve these problems. So then algae becomes ideal, right? Algae becomes ideal. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to get a lot out of it. Experimentally, we have succeeded. Experimentally, we have succeeded. At smaller scales, we have succeeded, but at larger scales, we are still suffering. At larger scales, we are still not in a position where we can say that algae is getting us the energy, or algae can potentially give us the energy. Still, a lot of active research is going on in India, in other parts of the world, where we are trying to find ways in which algae can be used effectively. But until now, we haven't really succeeded a lot in case of using algae with as our resources. So that's why this becomes very, very crucial in the context of uh, algae based biofuel. So this is the third generation, and then after that we have the fourth generation. Now fourth generation, in a manner you can say that it is right now completely experimental, where we are trying to enhance the productivity, enhance the production altogether, and decrease the pollution levels, uh, use the resources more effectively, and start using newer resources. For example, we are trying to use genetically modified organisms, we are trying to use microorganisms. Then we are trying to use the process of carbon sequestration. So more or less, that's why these are experimental in nature. These are experimental in nature, and that's why we cannot really say that this is a generation that exists. So largely, that's why whether you look at India's biofuel policy or you look at world around, you will find that largely the world explains about biofuel generations in terms of first, second, and the third generation, and fourth generation is largely experimental and not really a part of commercial production anywhere in the world. So that's why you need to understand these kind of things with regards to biofuel. So when we, for example, when we say carbon sequestration, do you know what is the meaning of carbon sequestration? What do we mean by this term carbon sequestration? Break, please. We just came out of the break 20 minutes back. Yeah, it's about capturing and storing carbon. Capturing and storing carbon, right? This is GMO, that is genetically modified organisms. GMO means genetically modified organisms. We'll discuss about genetically modified organisms when we go to the chapter of biotechnology. All right. Yeah, absorbing carbon. So that's why capturing and storing carbon is what we can say is carbon sequestration. Because ultimately when we are using organic sources in first and the second generations also, some amount of carbon dioxide emission will happen, right? It's not comparable to fossil fuels, not at all, right? It's not comparable to fossil fuels, drastically lower than the fossil fuels, but still there is some amount of emission. So we also want to capture that emission as well and store that carbon dioxide and not let any carbon dioxide be emitted. So that is why carbon sequestration. Now, coming to all these different types of biofuels, we have two types of biofuels largely that we have here: biodiesel and bioethanol. Biodiesel is something that we get from vegetable oils or oil seeds. So oil seeds become very, very crucial. So oil seeds will undergo the process of esterification and they will lead to the formation of biodiesel. Whereas in case of bioethanol, largely are we get them from energy crops. Largely, we get them from energy crops. So these energy crops will undergo the process of fermentation and they will lead to the production of bioethanol. Now, this biodiesel either can be blended with or it can replace diesel altogether. And in case of bioethanol, it can be blended with petrol or it can replace petrol altogether. So that is how we see that these processes are used in terms of the production of bioethanol and biodiesel. Now, bioethanol and biodiesel become very, very crucial because they can be used in replacement of the petroleum industry. Because petroleum industry, we understand that petroleum industry is very highly polluting, and right now that's why we don't want to use petroleum products. So we are looking for all the alternatives. We discussed about solar energy, we discussed about wind energy, etc. So in case of that, we see that biofuels also play a big role in coming through with finding us replacements for petrol, replacements for diesel, or at least reducing the amount of petrol and diesel being used. So that's why these two, they become very, very crucial uh, in the context of energy future of the world. So that's why when we look at the advantages of biodiesel, they can reduce carbon dioxide emission by 80%. By 80%. They do not produce any sulfur dioxide. They can reduce the particulate matter by up to 75%. So that's why the pollution level drastically can be brought down compared to petroleum diesel, right? And at the same time, we also see that there are other benefits. For example, the flash point is 150 degrees Celsius, meaning that they catch fire at a higher temperature, right? They catch fire at a higher temperature. So that's why compared to the petroleum diesel, where it is just about 70 degrees Celsius, we see that here it is approximately 150 degrees Celsius. And then there are significant lubricity improvements also that can be provided by biodiesel. So that's why with lesser number of additives, with the right additives, we can enhance engine performances also with the help of biodiesel. So that's why biodiesel has all these advantages, and that's why we see that biodiesel becomes very crucial in the context of uh, all the changes or modifications that we want in the petroleum industry. Now, when it comes to biodiesel, there is one source of biodiesel, that is jatropha. There is one source of biodiesel called as jatropha. Now, in case of jatropha, what you see is that jatropha is one crop. There is one crop that is actually uh, that has a long history with biodiesel. If you look at even India's case, you'll see that initially when we started working on biodiesel, when we started looking towards biodiesel as an alternative source, Jatropha was seen as one of the ways in which biodiesel economy would flourish, and Jatropha would become the primary source of biodiesel. If you go back 20 years in time, uh, at the time of the Atal Bihari Vajpayee government, when Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam was the president of India, we see that there was a lot of excitement being shown by the government of India back then and also the president of India back then. Because this is where we realize that Jatropha can be a very, very useful crop in biodiesel production. So the excitement also was shown in how the government was also talking about biodiesel back then and how they were trying to promote Jatropha. Why so? Because growing jatropha is not that difficult. You do not have very specific soil requirements, very specific moisture requirements, very specific climatic requirements. It can grow in low rainfall areas, high rainfall areas. You can grow it anywhere you want, side of roads, railways, canals, etc. You can grow them very easily. So that is where it was thought that okay, if jatropha can be just grown like that, we can have enough of jatropha and biodiesel can be produced from here. And to show this excitement to even the farmers of the country, we see that even in the Rashtrapati Bhavan back then, Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam, he had started growing jatropha just to show to the farmers that look, if I can grow, obviously you can grow it too. So it's so easy that somebody like me can also grow it. So that's why we see that there was so much of excitement being shown on jatropha. And in the 2009 biofuel policy also, you'll see that jatropha has been mentioned as one of the primary sources for biodiesel production. So the government of India showed a lot of interest. It was in the news constantly. UPSC also showed interest. There was a question asked almost 20 years back. There was one question on jatropha. But then after that, we see that the government of India stops showing any interest, and UPSC also stopped showing interest in this. So what happened to jatropha? Why did a crop which was seen as one of the most important crops in biodiesel production, where did it vanish? Why don't we talk about jatropha today? Only there are here and there are some mentions about jatropha, but it is not seen as the primary source as some of the other crops are seen. What happened? Now, today we need biodiesel production to happen at a very large scale. And that scale is where Jatropha falters. There are a couple of problems. One, the amount of energy that you get out of Jatropha, energy efficiency is very low. We discussed that out of 100 grams, algae can give you out of almost 50 grams of energy, etc. And other crops can give you 30-35%. Whereas in case of Jatropha, it is as low as just 15 to 20%. So meaning that from 100 kg of Jatropha or 100 kg of Jatropha seeds, you get just 20 kg of Jatropha oil from where you derive Jatropha based biodiesel. So the efficiency levels are extremely low. That is one problem. Second problem is that it takes a lot of time to grow. For the Jatropha plant to start bearing Jatropha fruits, it takes up to 6 months of time. So you can only generate energy 6 months later. So one, the time factor, and second, the production factor or the efficiency factor. These two are factors that together have led to this situation where Jatropha almost, we understood that Jatropha cannot be our primary source. It can be our additional source, and it is still India's additional source, but it cannot be a primary source as it was originally thought to be. And this is where we see that all the excitement about jatropha, it starts to die down eventually. And then that's why we see that in the 2018 biofuel policy there isn't even a mention of jatropha. Initially it is just mentioned as an additional resource. So that is where we see that overall jatropha actually, uh, jatropha fruits or seeds jatropha seeds could be used as biodiesel or for production of biodiesel. Then coming to bioethanol, we see that it can also reduce emissions. For example, carbon monoxide emissions by 30%, volatile organic compounds by up to 50%, nitrogen oxides by up to 35%, and even in case of carbon dioxide, at least by 40%. So even in this case also there is no sulfur, so there is no sulfur dioxide. so no sulfur dioxide. So there are all these advantages that bioethanol also gives us. And that's why these two become a very, very important part of the petroleum economy going forward, where we are talking about blending of biodiesel with diesel and blending of bioethanol with petrol. Now, in case of, so overall emissions can be reduced by up to 85%, which is big as compared to petrol. So bioethanol also becomes very, very crucial in this context. Now, so overall, that's why just understand that how they would have a positive impact on the environment. Now, the third kind of biofuel is biogas. Now, again, in case of biogas also, when it comes to biogas, it is produced by breaking of organic matter in the absence of oxygen, meaning in the anoxic conditions or anaerobic conditions. So, breakdown of organic matter. So, when this breakdown of organic matter happens, this is where we see that in the anaerobic digestion of the organic matter would lead to biogas production. So if you look at this, this is where the production would happen, that the all the organic matter that you have, all these organic matter, they basically can be stored in this, they can be stored in the anaerobic digester. And this is where the oxygen supply is almost cut off, very, very small amount of oxygen. So in the absence of oxygen, more or less you can say, the breakdown of organic matter happens, and then this leads to production of the gases, and these gases will start accumulating in the gas holder. So this gas holder is where you have the biogas. This is where it stores biogas. And then this biogas can be taken for power generation. So either for electricity generation or even as a domestic cooking fuel also you can use it. So that's why this is how biogas can be produced. Now biogas can be produced at a very small scale also. It can be produced at very small scale at a community level as well. You need not always have a very big biogas plant. So that's why popularly in India they are also called as gobar gas plants. The term gobar gas is used. Gobar meaning cow dung. So that's why cow dung based gas, because you have this organic matter which will decompose, and as it decomposes, it releases biogas. Now, this biogas largely contains methane. Primarily, it is methane. Wherever this kind of decomposition happens in the absence of oxygen, methane will be produced. So that's why largely it is methane. And apart from methane, there can be others. For example, carbon dioxide, small amounts of hydrogen sulfide, even small amount of nitrogen oxides as well. So that's why nitrogen oxides, carbon monoxide can be there. Even oxygen, traces of oxygen also can be there. So overall, there are all these kinds of different gases, but largely just remember that here also largely it is methane, up to 75%. Up to 75% is just methane, and then in the rest 25% you have all the other gases. So overall, that's why this is what biogas is. Now in case of biogas, that's why it is when it comes to biogas, just understand one very, very important value of biogas, that all the advantages that we discussed in case of solar energy, wind energy, geothermal energy, etc., they all are applicable here as well. They are renewable, they are clean sources of energy, they are long lasting, they will create or they are creating jobs, they require low maintenance. So all these things that we discussed in case of solar or wind energy or geothermal energy, all these advantages are applicable to bioenergy and specifically to biogas also. But in case of biogas, there is one very, very important advantage that biogas gives us that none of the others do. All right, now understand this very, very important advantage, and this is how it has a very, very important positive impact on global warming, that how it can reduce potentially global warming. Now when we talk about this decomposition of organic waste, like let's say cow dung, would have happened naturally as well. Correct. That for example, let's say if there is cow dung lying somewhere on the sides of the road somewhere, you would see that this cow dung also decomposes, right? It decomposes, and if you observe it for a week or 10 days of time, you would see that it would completely be gone, right? It would have completely decomposed. Now this natural decomposition, have you seen this, that any organic waste, like even dried leaves for example, from that the same scenario, or cow dung is a primary example where you'll see that very quickly it just starts to vanish. You've seen it. I hope that you don't just go and keep on observing it, but I'm sure that you know about it, you have seen it, that how it keeps on decomposing. So as it decomposes, methane gas is emitted with this decomposition. Now when you use the same cow dung in a biogas plant, then you do not let that methane go into the atmosphere, right? It will not simply go and get added to the atmosphere. Instead it becomes biogas, and then you use that biogas, you use it for combustion of biogas. And combustion of biogas in a manner means oxidation. So combustion is the same process that we discussed in case of methane hydrates, if you remember. So this happens when the combustion takes place. When combustion takes place, this happens. So ultimately what is happening is that instead of releasing carbon dioxide, instead of releasing methane into the atmosphere, we are releasing carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And that's great, because not great, rather I would say less harmful. Why? Because as we discussed, that methane as a greenhouse gas is far more dangerous than carbon dioxide. So using this waste, animal waste or organic waste, gives us a way in which we can somehow offset some amount of methane addition into the atmosphere. That lesser amount of methane will be added to the atmosphere, and that's why in a manner we can offset that. So that's why this is the impact that we were speaking of, that it can help in reducing global climate change. Because whether it comes to nitrogen dioxide or in case of methane, these are all very very dangerous. That nitrogen dioxide for example can warm the atmosphere by up to 300 times more than carbon dioxide, and methane up to 25, even up to 25 to 70, 80 times more than carbon dioxide. So that's why from that perspective biogas has an advantage, because now you are not emitting methane into the atmosphere, but instead you are emitting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. That is a very very important advantage of biogas. Now the next topic that we have is national policy on biofuels of 2018. But before that, if you have any questions, if you want to ask anything. Which generation biofuel India uses the most? We largely we have been using first generation only. We haven't been able to go beyond the first stage in most of the cases. So that's why, and it's not only about India, but rather you will see that in most parts of the world, uh, it is still the first generation of biofuel that the world is using. Is Govardhan scheme related to biogas? Yes, yes, it is related to biogas. Basically, it is a scheme where any kind of organic waste, whether it is cow dung or any agricultural waste or municipal waste, so any kind of organic waste, we want to convert that into biogas or bio CNG, etc. So basically, it is a waste to energy kind of a scheme. So you are correct. Is biogas plant affordable? So you can say that, because see, it does not take a lot of effort. uh, it does not take a lot of effort in setting up biogas plants. That's why these small scale gobar gas plants are present across India, because at community level, at smaller uh, smaller level, we see that it is easy to use biogas. I mean, biogas plants. So that's why, yes, you can say that it is affordable. In which states jatropha plants are cultivated more in India? Largely the southern part, because it's a very tropical kind of a plant. So that's why largely we see that below the Tropic of Cancer, all the states they are better in case of production. So that's why the South Indian states largely. Plus you can also add Maharashtra, etc. to it. Can we get organic manure after producing energy? Yes, actually we can. If you look at, let me just go back to what we discussed. If you see this, we can actually produce, or we can get biofertilizer out of it. So that's why the leftovers that we have, the leftovers can also be used. What is the difference between biodiesel and normal diesel using in vehicles? Because chemically they are not exactly the same. Chemically biodiesel and the petroleum diesel, they are not exactly the same. And most of the vehicles right now that we have, they are calibrated to be used with diesel. So and then there are other technical parameters. For example, let's say when we talk about how soon it catches fire, we see that biodiesel needs higher temperature to for ignition compared to what we need for diesel. So there are these subtle differences that we have. Notes के लिए PPT prefer करें, yeah. For the notes you can use the PPTs, and I mean whatever, let's say if you want to make running notes along with the lectures, you can do that. Otherwise all the PPTs anyway will be available for you as annotated PPTs. Use that. So it depends on how you want to go about it. Any scheme for biogas plant provided to farmers? There are two or three schemes that you can say. One is the Govardhan scheme. Then there is Pradhan Mantri Jeevan scheme. That is also one of the schemes there. Then even in case of what we are just about to discuss about India's biofuel policy, there also you'll see that there are supports being given to the farmer. So these are the schemes that you can list out if in case of schemes related to biodiesel or biofuels in general. How they are asking questions from this topic. We'll take an example towards the end. We'll take an example of what already has come from here. Which is better in efficiency versus calorific value in bioethanol versus biodiesel? So in case of, see, bioethanol in general, when it comes to diesel versus ethanol in general, so you will see that the calorific value is always higher in cases of the any hydrocarbon or anything that has larger number of hydrocarbons, although there the pollution levels can also start to increase. So that's why we see that calorific value will always be higher when you have larger number of hydrocarbons present, whereas in case of bioethanol, for example, you have only uh, one ethanol, that is only one kind of hydrocarbon. So that's why there we see that the efficiency levels can be lower in that sense, but the pollution levels also will be lower. So that is where we have to see a trade off between these two. Efficiency wise also, so efficiency and calorific value, you can say, more or less are connected. Now in case of, for example, when you look at diesel versus petrol, you'll find that more or less they are same, only that petrol has little more calorific value than diesel. So it has better efficiency in that sense, you can say, because density, for example, of diesel is higher. Diesel is denser, more viscous as compared to petrol. So that's why we see that there are all these kind of differences that we see between petrol and diesel as well. And same percolates with in case of biodiesel and bioethanol also. That in case of bioethanol versus biodiesel also, certain something very similar will be seen. But as biodiesel has more number of hydrocarbons, largely it will have better calorific value. How is bio CNG produced? Bio CNG is produced exactly how we discussed about bio gas. Bio CNG is nothing but, you can say, a larger form of biogas, or a larger scale of production of biogas. How human waste is used in making biofuel? Any kind of organic waste in a very similar fashion as we discussed about cow dung in making biogas can be used. Can we say anaerobic and anoxic both are same in a way or the other? Yeah, more or less, yes. इंडिया में सबसे बड़ा गोबर गैस प्लांट, द लार्जेस्ट प्लांट राइट नाउ दैट वी आर सेटिंग अप इज इन मध्य प्रदेश, दैट इज अ बायो सीएनजी प्लांट नियर इंदौर. Jatropha plants and seeds or fruits both are used. The seeds are used. Where do we get biodiesel? Actually, never seen anyone using biodiesel for any machinery. No, biodiesel is being used everywhere. I mean, every heavy duty vehicle which is using diesel, there is a blending that has been done. That 5%, we want to achieve up to 5%, already almost 3% of blending has been achieved. That out of that diesel, 3% is biodiesel and 97% is diesel. So it is actually being used everywhere already. Can gas holders be installed domestically? Yes, it's not very difficult to make them. What was the last point for nitrogen dioxide and methane? Aren't they contributing to greenhouse? Yes, they are. That's the problem. Does biogas pollute the environment? If yes, what are the remedies? It does pollute the environment, but pollution levels are drastically low. Drastically low. It does produce carbon dioxide. So, carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas. So, yes, it does add to pollution, but the levels are very, very low. So, that's why they will be considered as clean. The remedies can be carbon sequestration, but that's very difficult. Theoretically, it's a possibility, but practically very difficult. Is it necessary to use biodiesel as negligible percentage of diesel? No, see, don't say it negligible. We would increase it further, but just that it's not very easy to produce biodiesel. So that's why right now the percentage is very small, but we are eventually increasing it every year. You'll see that there is an improvement here. Carbon sequestration and carbon sink are the same thing. Carbon sequestration is a way in which you make carbon sinks or you use carbon sinks. Carbon sink is anything that can absorb carbon. So when we use these mechanisms, that the process is called as carbon sequestration. All right. So the the next topic for us is National Biofuel Policy of 2018. Now, in National Biofuel Policy, the main objective that has been set by Ministry of New and Renewable Energy is that we want to achieve 20% blending of ethanol in petrol and 5% blending of biodiesel in diesel to be achieved by 2025. Initially, in 2018, the target year was 2030, but then there was an amendment that was made to this policy in 2021, and this 2030 was brought down to 2025. So we have advanced the getting to the targets by 5 years. So initially it was 2030 in the 2018 policy, then an amendment was made in 2021, and now it was made as 2025. Now, what exactly is this policy? So there are certain important points with regards to the policy that you should know. First is categorization. Now, for the first time in India, we have done a categorization of all the resources that we have into the first, second, and third generations. Into first, second, and third generation. So until now, there was no categorization. Until now, we have never done any categorization. But in 2018 biofuel policy, for the first time, a categorization has been done. So this categorization also helps us in understanding of our resources, understanding of the various resources that we have, and how do we channelize all the different resources, how do we produce all these different types of biofuels. So that's why this categorization is very similar to what the categorization what we just discussed about, the basic generations that we discussed. Because before 2018 policy, there was the 2009 policy also, but the 2009 policy did abysmally very you can say uh, it did not get to the targets, it did not achieve any of the targets, did not even get near to any of the targets that were set up, because there was no clear roadmap. There were very good targets being set up, but these targets, how do we get to the targets, what are the roadmaps to get to the targets, all everything was in the air. Nothing happened. For example, uh, the 2009 policy says that India will achieve 20% of blending of ethanol with petrol by 2017, and 5% blending of biodiesel with diesel by 2017. And in 2017, we were sitting at 4% blending of petrol, where we wanted to reach 20%. So we were completely off target, because we achieved 20% of what exactly the target was. Just one fifth of the target is where we reached. In biodiesel also, we were nowhere in 2017. And then the 2018 policy came in, where all these new ways to achieve the targets were also set up. So first, that's why it was categorization. Categorization uh, into first, second, and third generation of biofuels. Then the scope of raw material was also set. Scope of raw material meaning that what are the raw materials that we want to use for biofuel production. So raw materials were set up. What kind of raw material? Sugar based raw material. So sugar based crops can be used. Sugar based crops meaning, for example, sugarcane, one of the most important one here. All right. So sugar based crops. Then after that, they mentioned starch based crops. Starch based crops. Starch based crops, basically the ones which are good sources of carbohydrates. For example, corn has been mentioned here. Then municipal waste. So municipal waste can also be used as a resource. Then after that, agricultural waste. So here a lot of things have been mentioned. For example, crop residue. Crop residue can be used. Then apart from residue, we can also make the use of they have written broken grains or broken, let's say broken rice, for example. So the rice that doesn't reach the market. So that kind of rice that can be used in biofuel production. Then interestingly, they also have mentioned rotten potato, because see, both with rice and potato, they could not have allowed using rice or using potato for biofuel production, because these are staples, right, eaten all across the country. So whichever state you go in, one way or the other, huge consumption of potato and huge consumption of rice is happening, correct? So that's why they could not have allowed direct use of potato or direct use of any rice. That would have basically uh, improved, I mean, it would have increased the demand for rice and potato, leading to increase in prices of rice and potato, which India cannot afford, because that will lead directly to increase in the food prices or food inflation. So that's why that will be bad for Indian economy. So that's why in these kind of issues we see that the that's why broken rice or rotten potatoes have been mentioned. So that's why these rotten potatoes, instead of going into your samosas and dosas, will start going into biofuel production plants. So so that is where we see that there will be an health related advantage as well. Then agricultural waste has been mentioned. Then apart from that, surplus crops has been mentioned. Now this is where farmers also get some advantage, where they are saying that surplus crops, many a times this happens that there's a bumper crop that the production is very good, and when the production is very good, farmer loses, because they operationally they don't get the price in the market, and their production cost would have been very high, and they're not getting that good price in the market. So overall, that's why we see that surplus crops also have been kept, that the government is saying that whatever is the extra production, that extra production can be sent for biofuel production, and farmer will be paid for that. So the loss that farmer makes in terms of bumper crops, that loss can be minimized by using them in biofuel production. So that's why surplus crops. And then lastly, there is one more interesting source: used cooking oil. Used cooking oil. Now, why use cooking oil? You might have heard about this, read about this, that if you heat oil, cooking oil, let's say 3 times, 4 times to very high temperature, it starts to change chemically, and then it has trans fats, it has bad fats in general, you can say. So it is unhealthy. Obviously, I mean, oil can be unhealthy anyway, but when you have used it or you have heated it, reheated it couple of times, then starts to become unhealthier, and then in that case it is bad for health. So the government says that okay, use cooking oil by the restaurants actually can sell it to various agencies. There are various agencies that have been set up, and these agencies can buy the used cooking oil from the restaurants. So that is also something which is very very important, because I mean, in the restaurants, hotels, or even if you are eating from a roadside vendor, you do not know whether they are using fresh oil or not, and many a times they would be using reheated oil, which is bad for health. And when you go out eating in a restaurant, you do not go to the kitchen and ask whether they are using a fresh oil, or whether they have heated the same oil and have been heating the same oil all throughout the day, correct? So that's why that is bad for us. So this is where the restaurants are being given the option that they can sell the used cooking oil to these agencies, and these agencies will collect that oil, and then again this also will be sent to biofuel production plants. So that's why scope of raw material has been well defined now. This was not the case earlier. Now we have defined that okay, these are the sources from where we can derive biofuels. In 2021 amendment, another source was mentioned, that was seaweeds. Seaweeds was also added as a source in 2021. So scope of raw material, then protection for farmers. Protection to farmers basically is in terms of what we discussed as the surplus crops. or the surplus production. So that is where farmers can also gain. Then there is something called as viability gap funding. Now this viability gap funding basically is, you can say, the extra funding, right? This is basically the extra amount that can be given to a scheme. Viability gap funding is given to these, some of these crucial schemes and crucial policies of the government of India, where they believe that if, let's say, in the future they need more energy, if this scheme or policy needs more money, then that more money will also be provided. That initially, let's say, a budget of 5,000 crore has been allocated, but we see that 5,000 crores may not be enough. It might need additional 1,500 crores. So those additional 1,500 crores will also be provided to these certain schemes which are brought under the purview of viability gap funding. So viability gap funding is basically something that bridges the gap between what is the actual money requirement versus what is the budget allocated to this policy or scheme. So that's why viability gap funding becomes very important in this context, that this has been provided specially for biodiesel production. So boost to biodiesel production, because we know that biodiesel production is difficult. uh, if we, I mean, the amount of fuel that you can get from biodiesel based crops is less. So that is where we see that it actually can, it needs more help. This is where it needs more help, and that more help is being provided by the government. So that's why they are trying to boost biodiesel production by providing incentives to the farmers, providing viability gap funding, providing tax incentives in certain cases, direct or indirect taxes. So there are all these kind of things that are being given, and these are the things that will contribute to better implementation of the policy. And that is where all this confidence comes from, that initially they had kept the target for 2030, and then they reduced the target, and they brought the time period to an earlier timeline, that is 2025. We already see that there are certain districts where already 20% blending is already being provided. So 20% blending of petrol with I mean of bioethanol with petrol already has started in some districts of India, and then there are others where it is slowly being implemented. Overall, as a national average, we see that we are approximately at 12% of blending, whereas in many of the cities we already have been able to reach 20% blending. So that's why when we look at the expected benefits out of the policy, we do understand that there are various aspects where this can be very, very useful. So, for example, reduced import dependency. Now, why reduced import dependency? Because we are blending petrol, let's say, when bioethanol is being blended with petrol. Now, petrol is something that we have to import, petroleum is something that we import. So if, let's say, 20% blending happens, 20% blending would mean that instead of using 100 liters of petrol, you are using 80 liters of petrol and 20 liters of bioethanol. So if you were importing 100 liters of petrol, now you have to import only 80 liters of petrol. So that's why import dependency starts to decrease. And that is also very, very good for forex reserves, that is foreign exchange that we have. So foreign exchange reserves that India has, that will improve, and if that improves, we can perform better in international trade, because we'll have money available for international trade. So that's why overall it will have a positive impact on Indian economy, because you would have not to import as much petrol as we are importing currently. And that's why you'll see that there are data points also that are actually uh, helping us understand this, that if, let's say, for example, when you talk about 1 crore liters of E10 fuel, 1 crore liters of E10 fuel, E10 basically means, E10 means 10% blending. All right, 10% blending. So that's why similarly, when we say E20, E20 means that it has 20% blending, and so on. So that's why this is how we define blending numbers. So these kind of numbers you'll actually come across, where you'll see that these kind of numbers are actually being produced in a lot of ways. So just understand that whenever these numbers are being produced, all right, wherever you see these numbers, just understand that these numbers basically mean how much of blending is happening, how much of blending is happening. So that's why E10, E20, etc. So now just understand this, that when we talk about E10 fuel, if we are saying that we have 1 crore liters of E10 fuel, 1 crore liters of E10 fuel can save up to rupees 28 crores. It can lead to a saving of rupees 28 crores worth of foreign reserves. Now, in one year, in a manner you can say approximately supply of more than 200 crore liters happen. So that's a 200 crore liters would mean how much? 28 into 200. That is, we'll be able to save rupees 5600 crores worth of forex reserves just by using bioethanol, just by blending 10% of bioethanol. So that's why we see that it leads to reduced import dependency. Similarly, we are talking about cleaner environment. Why cleaner environment? Again, if we take as reference 1 crore liters of E10 fuel, all right, if we take as a reference 1 crore liters of E10 fuel, then it leads to reduction of almost 20,000 tons carbon dioxide. 20,000 tons of carbon dioxide production or emission can be reduced by using just 1 crore liters of E10 fuel. So just imagine the kind of numbers that we are talking of. Similarly, health benefits from the perspective of one, that is pollution, right? First is air pollution, because it will lead to lesser of air pollution levels will decrease. At the same time, the health benefits also come from the cooking oil, where we talked about used cooking oil and how used cooking oil can be resupplied to the government, and government can then use it for biofuel plants, and this is where it can go to the fuel production instead of being used and overused again and again. So this is where you have to understand the health benefits and how these health benefits also come into the picture. So this is how we are talking about used cooking oil. And then municipal solid waste management, where we understand that organic waste that we are generating out of the biofuel plants, this or organic waste that we are generating in general, this organic waste also can be reduced further, right? This organic waste can also be reduced further. So that's why we actually can make the use of municipal solid waste management as well. Then infrastructure investment in rural areas. Now this is also very very important, that we'll see that more infrastructure investment can happen in rural areas, because it's not that there is any compulsion that we have to set up these kind of plants only in urban areas or only in city, within the city limits, etc. No, these plants can be set up in rural areas as well, and this is exactly what we want. That rural infrastructure should grow, rural economy should grow. The disparity that we have between the urban and the rural economy, that needs to be bridged. So that is where the investment that it happens, when the investments happen in the rural areas, it will lead to more opportunities for the people living in rural areas. It will lead to more income sources being generated for them, and an entire economy starts to grow around these kind of plants. So that's why, again, if you look at just one example of for let's say if we have one uh, biofuel plant that generates 100, let's say, kiloliters per day, all right, let's say it generates 100 kiloliters per day. If we have a refinery, a biorefinery of 100 kiloliters per day, it will be able to generate up to investment of rupees 800 crores. So one plant with capacity of 100 kiloliters per day can actually produce or it can lead to generation of almost a wealth of 800 crore rupees, which is a very very significant figure, especially given the rural economy. And this is something that can help us in bridging the gap that we have between the urban and the rural economy. So that's why we have to understand this point, and then it can lead to employment generation as well. If you just again talk about just one plant which has a capacity of 100 kiloliters per day, then this one plant can very easily contribute to almost 1200 jobs. It can contribute to up to 1200 jobs, just one such plant. So that's why there are a lot of these things. Similarly, we discussed about additional income to the farmers, that how farmers can also benefit from schemes like these. That where it comes to the farmers, for example, we discussed about the surplus and how we can see the help that the farmers can get from the surplus. Similarly, in biodiesel production, also we see that farmers will get additional benefits. They will be incentivized if they are growing plants or crops which are related to biodiesel production. So that's why they also can become sources for additional income to the for the farmers as well. So that's why there are so many expected benefits out of the policy, which is not only about the environment or not only about uh, reducing the burden of pollution and climate change, but we see that there are a lot of other benefits also that we draw out of these kind of policies. So that's why this national biofuel policy becomes a very very important part. That, and we discussed about all these different points and how they can actually help in all these different ways. So there has been this scheme also. There is the Pradhan Mantri Jeevan Yojana, where we see that total financial outlay of approximately 2000 crores has been given, and this is largely related to bioethanol production. All right, bioethanol. This is largely related to bioethanol production and how bioethanol production can be increased in India. Now, there is one problem that we need to understand, especially with regards to biofuels, that how biofuels can be a problem. They can become a problem for food security. Now, when it comes to food security, just understand one aspect of food security, that how there is an issue that they can generate. So what is the issue? We know that food crops are being used, right? We know that food crops become a primary source for biofuel. So now, because food crops become a primary source for biofuel, this is where this can lead to situation where food prices can increase. Just understand the various aspects of what can happen. Production of genetically modified crops, right? Production of genetically modified crops can be encouraged, right? It might be encouraged. Now, how exactly will it be encouraged? Because we know that there are ways in which we might be able to do better with genetic modification, instead of uh, instead of directly using the same crop plant. Now, so what may happen is that many companies etc may start to genetically modify these genetically modify many of these crops, and by doing this genetic modification they might want to improve the capacity in terms of biofuels. Instead of looking for adding more nutritional value, we might see that they might start doing this. So overall what happens is what happens is that in this particular scenario this becomes a very, very problematic situation. Similarly, what happens is the audio and video coming correctly? Any issue if anyone is facing, can you let me know? Okay, so all good. All right. Right. So this is one problem, that genetically modified this genetically modified genetic modification might be done. Similarly, another problem is that there can be a decrease in the food import capacity, especially for the poorest countries. All right. So now, in this particular scenario, when it comes to this situation, just understand this, that what would happen, that many of the countries, instead of supplying food to other countries, when they are exporting food to the needy countries, they might want that, okay, if I have the surplus crop, why not use it for biodiesel production or biofuel production, because that will help me more in production of fuel and help me or help this country instead of just supplying this food. So in this case, what happens is that supply starts to decrease. Sorry, the demand in this scenario is starting to increase, and the supply remains the same. So this is where we see that there will be an increase in the crop prices, or increase in the food prices altogether. That now the demand, basically, in a manner you can say that demand remains constant, but the supply decreases. Supply decreases. All right. So in this scenario, the price will increase. The price will increase. Similarly, in this scenario, if you see, the biofuel production will cause an increase of food prices due to increasing demand for agricultural produce. Correct. There can be a increase in demand for agricultural produce, because what happens in this particular scenario is that here the demand increases, because now the same crop, or the same crop is being demanded for both food and fuel, right? So demand increases and the supply remains constant, because supply is that much only, you have only that much of production happening, but the demand from both the industries are coming. Food also is demanding it, fuel is also demanding it. So then in that case also it can lead to price rise. It can also, this also can lead to price rise. So that is also one of the scenarios. Now, one more thing that can happen is that there can be a competition in resources, competition for resources. So now in this particular case, what happens is that overall we have the same land and water resources available. You want to use the same, you want to use the same land resource for fuel production also, for energy production also, food production and fuel production also. So again, the resource price increases here, right? Resource price increases here. So that also is a problem. That also is a problem. So overall we see that there are, so here resource price increases, that also leads to price rise. So so that's why there are all these issues that we have. Similarly, it might also lead to lower food quality and diversity, and we might see that our preference would be quantity, that we want higher quantity of food instead of better quality of food. So that also can be one of the challenges overall, and that's why this also can lead to this kind of situation. So hence you need to understand that how exactly there are all these things which are at the interplay, and that's why there is this food security problem that we very often discuss in the context of biofuel. And then lastly, there is one point, I don't think it is visible. So it is water availability for human consumption will also be threatened. Water availability for human consumption. Now, in case of water availability, just understand this problem also, that water availability starts to decrease. Now, how does water availability decrease? Because many of these crops, they need higher quantity of water. For example, you give me examples of couple of crops that use the highest amount of water. Which crops? Which are the crops which need the highest quantity of water? Yeah, paddy, sugarcane, correct. And both paddy and sugarcane, that is rice and sugarcane, both can be used as biofuel, or both can be used as resources for biofuel production. So that's why in these cases also we know that the same crops that you want to use for biofuel production, they need the highest amount of water, right? They need the highest amount of water. So that also is a big challenge, that water availability for human consumption also would be threatened. So there are all these dimensions, there are all these issues, especially in the context, of biofuel, that we need to understand. So that's why just remember this, and this is a very crucial point from this perspective. Read this question. All right, let me launch the poll for you. Please mark your answers. Yeah, so 58% of you have marked B, which is correct. So look at the options, look at these statements given. First is production of, so it is possible to produce algae based biofuel. What is or are the likely limitations of developing countries in promoting this industry? First, production of algae based biofuel is possible in seas only and not continents. First, we have an extreme word. Second, we discussed that algae grow underwater. It can be seas, it can be oceans, it can be lakes, it can be ponds. So it's not that it is only growing in the seas and not on continents. So this is wrong. So statement number one is wrong. So statement number one is wrong. It means that A and D cannot be the answer. So either two and three or only three. So three is uh, correct for sure. Economically viable production necessitates setting up of large scale facilities which may raise ecological and social concerns. So this is correct, that we would have to modify in a manner, we'll have to modify the uh, water resources, correct. We'll have to modify the water resources, modify the aquatic ecosystem, and that can lead to degradation of the aquatic ecosystems. So that's why 3 definitely is correct. Setting up and engineering algae based biofuel production requires high level of expertise or technology until the construction is completed. This is correct, and we discussed that how on a small scale we have been able to we have succeeded, but we haven't been able to succeed at a larger scale, correct. we haven't been able to scale it up at a level where commercially we can use the algae based resources. So that's why you have to understand that in all these cases, this is where we are looking at uh, the situation currently. So that's why the correct answer here will be 2 and 3 only. All right, this will be 2 and 3 only. So any question, anything that you want to ask from here? Please write that last point as it is not visible. Last point. Okay, so we are saying that it will be visible. I mean, only on the screen it's not visible, but still it says water availability for human consumption will be threatened. All right, water availability for human consumption will be threatened. Bio-CNG, see, bio-CNG is not different from biogas. It is basically the same, just that the scale of bio-CNG is much larger than biogas. That's it. Is Indian society, even in the present times, ready to adapt revolutionary ideas like gas holders in their premises? Why it? I mean, it's not even revolutionary anymore. It is something that we have been using for a very long time now. So at community level, we do see that in rural spaces, this is being done already. Please explain the point viability gap funding. So viability gap funding basically is a kind, you can say, in a manner, this is what the government of India has given as an opportunity to certain schemes and certain policies, that where these are very important policies, where a very important schemes, and they have been given this idea that okay, fine, even if let's say in future you are going to need more money, we'll provide you that money. And even if the budget allocation says that okay, you will be only provided with this much of budget, but still if you need extra money in one form or the other, extra money will be provided. And that is the viability gap funding. What is the extra funding required for making a certain project viable? So that's why that gap is being filled between the required amount of money versus what was the money being provided. How much percentage can we blend biofuel into original diesel? We can go very high. I mean, in case of ethanol, at least you'll see that the percentages in some of the countries have been as high as up to 85%. So that's why you can actually go very high. So it's not that you have to limit yourself only to 5-10%. But for India, the problem is that biodiesel production is very difficult. Bioethanol production comparatively is easier. And that's why we can have better targets for bioethanol compared to biodiesel. What are the fuel crops? Fuel crops basically are the crops which we are going growing for fuel production, that some kind of fuel production is required to be done. And in that case, even corn, soybean, etc., they can be called as fuel crops as well if they are being grown for biofuel production. Can't millets be used for biofuel production? Yes, of course they can be used, because they also are very good carbohydrate sources, and that's why they can be used. Plus, their residues also are actually used. So yes, of course it is usable and it can be used. Definitely can be used. Any other question? I'm not getting the second point in the question. Second point. Setting up and engineering the algae-based biofuel production requires high level of expertise and technology until the construction is completed. So this is basically what we discussed, that getting energy out of algae is not that easy. Getting the kind of energy that we need is not that easy. So that's why it is going to take some effort from our end to get that done. So that's why we have succeeded at smaller scales, but not at larger scales. But if you want to set up the industry, you need it to be done at very large scale, where very high level of expertise and technology is required, which is where again where you'll have to spend a lot of money, and still you are not guaranteed of that success. What is the best suitable renewable energy for current infrastructure and financial situation of India? See, it has to be a mix, because you cannot have only a one state solution. You cannot have only a solar energy based or a wind energy solution. It has to be a blend of everything. Although getting energy from wind energy and solar energy is cheaper, solar energy is the cheapest currently. Wind energy also is fairly cheap. Biofuel not so much right now, but it can also become cheaper as we start setting it up with better infrastructure. So overall, it has to be a blend of everything. Even nuclear energy becomes important, because initial setup cost is high, but eventually it gives you energy for a very long time. So that's why that also has to be a part of it. Are we going to discuss tidal energy? No. Tidal energy and wave energy, not a lot has happened in India. So overall, I don't believe that they are going to be very important. So that's why we are leaving it. How to maintain a balance between food and fuel crops? That's very difficult to even maintain, because only policies and policies like these can do it, that you have to restrict certain things only to so that they are not being overused, and they are not uh, wasting resources in terms of fuel production. So that's why we have to understand that aspect as well. Right, so I think I've answered most of the questions. So let's end the class here itself. I mean, we can start with a fresh topic, that is nuclear energy, in the next class. I don't think tomorrow, I think, is a holiday on the account of Shivratri. So when we meet next, we'll discuss about nuclear technology and nuclear energy. You also have the webinar today, so please take a break for like 10-15 minutes, and please be back for the webinar, and please do attend the webinar as well. Thank you.